So I went a bit long on my part 3 answer to this. I'm going to stop calling her names yet, but you've all heard it before already, so I don't need to keep reiterating that. The simple fact that another phony feminist, or someone who wears the mantle of a feminist undeservedly, comes up with this list of supposed identifying marks which reveal when a man is supposedly a supporter of the crime of rape. And continuing to address each and every one of these, because once I got started I just realized that I couldn't just let it drop. I actually had to go through each and every one of these things and at least give a little bit of insight in on them, if for no other reason, just to show how utterly asinine and actually hateful this entire compilation is. So picking up where I left off previously, the next item she has on the list reads thusly: he argues that certain male behaviors towards women are, quote, cultural, unquote, and therefore not legitimate subjects of feminist attention. So I guess what she's trying to say here is that cultural behaviors and cultural attitudes in the game of sexual interactions or intimate interactions between the sexes is only a one-way street. That there's no such thing as cultural behaviors and cultural attitudes by women towards men. And if that's in any way what she's trying to suggest, again, she is being criminally dishonest, because there are a whole slew of things, a wide range of behaviors that women, especially here in the Western world, engage in, which can readily be chalked up to cultural norms. And let's just take a look at a few of them. For instance, we've got stuff that's considered on the low end of the scale, such as the general tendency for women to play hard to get when interacting with guys who are trying to take interest in them or trying to find interest in them. Or there's another cultural aspect somewhat related to that, which is one that you hear men complain about quite often, which is that especially during their younger years, women tend to have a tendency to either reject or just discount the so-called nice guy, those who are considered safe, stable, and reliable, and tend to profess a preference and in many instances actively pursue the so-called exciting guys, the free-spirited or the so-called bad boy types. And sometimes these are the very men who wind up being those of dangerous characteristics, whether that means that they're the type of person who will actually subject any women that they're involved with to danger due to their lifestyle, or it could possibly be that the individual himself is violent and will resort to violence in what he perceives as relating to his woman. Whether that be putting her in check or keeping her in line or whatever. You have other cultural behaviors that Western women engage in. For instance, many still, even in this day of supposed liberation and independence, whatnot, usually when the chips are down, however, many if not most women will still invoke cultural traditions such as who gets to pay when they go out on dates, or if it involves a stable relationship where the two are actually living together, sharing a household, whether they're married or postal cues, the women, based on our cultural traditions, will usually opt to either remain in the home as the housekeepers, or they'll want to limit their exposure as far as their involvement in working outside the home, usually leaving that to the male to be the main breadwinner. Other cultural behaviors include wearing sexually provocative clothing and or sending sexually suggestive signals in order to entice men's interest in them. And oftentimes when they do this, it's frequently nothing more than just a test of her attractiveness or her ability to manipulate men's behaviors so that she can feel that she has a sense of empowerment about herself. These cultural behaviors by women also have ugly extremes also. For instance, in our culture, it is not uncommon for women, again, as part of their testing their sexual powers, to actually play off of the jealousies of men in order to have them to fight for her attentions and for her favors, sometimes fighting literally. And in those situations, what does the woman usually do? She may step in and try to play the situation off as showing her support or trying to intervene in preventing things from escalating. But more often than not, it's not too uncommon to actually watch a woman manipulate men's jealousies like that, have them literally fighting over her, and she'll just sit back and watch from the sidelines, just enjoying the situation as a spectator, relishing in the effectiveness of her sexualized feminine wiles. For a lot of these women, it's a game to them, but it's based and it's steeped in culture, as much as we may want to deny that, which is why a lot more men, especially lately, are trying to wake up to a new dawn to where they don't allow themselves to be thusly manipulated, because it is the 21st century, we do live in a technological age, and we, generally speaking, do have equal opportunities, equal responsibilities, we should be treated as equals, we should be held to the same standards, etc. Or if you want to go really extreme, then what about our culture, which not only permits but promotes out of wedlock babies, and often by extension the enslavement, whether that be through child support or through some sort of drama that just keeps everybody at odds with one another and ripping each other's hair out, which is again another part of the power play, or the worst of the worst, actually committing paternity fraud. All of these things are as much cultural as they are legal. And it is the true feminist, the genuine feminist, who are actually fighting to change both that culture and that set of misandristic, archaic, and sexist laws. And if you really want to talk about culture as it relates to how one sex, one gender uses the cultural norms in order to suppress or oppress the members of the opposite gender, then consider our modern day culture of violence against men. You see, we hear without let up about the horrors and the evils of violence against women, and those are legitimate and valid concerns. But because we've had that mantra so severely and so relentlessly pounded and beaten into our heads without let up, that we have closed a blind eye and have convinced ourselves that women's violence against men is no big deal. Men are supposed to be strong and they're just supposed to buck up anyway. And so female violence against men just gets excused, swept under the rug. No big deal, nothing to see here, move along. Make a bunch of television commercials making fun of it. Ha ha, ha ha ha. Domestic violence sure is funny, Jim. So to alter your talking point just slightly, let's reread it with just a little bit of an alteration. She argues that certain female behaviors towards men are, quote, cultural, unquote, and therefore not legitimate subjects of masculist attention. Now take into consideration everything that was said up to this point, everything about cultural behaviors between the sexes, and apply your sentence exactly the way that I just read it, and you will see, if you're sincere, that we actually have more in common than you think. Only I'm pointing out that it's not one-sided. It cuts across both boundaries. Equal concerns, equal responsibilities, equal accountabilities. It's only fair. I apologize for both the delay and the disruption. This past week I've had several things come up unexpectedly which I felt I needed to address. Plus I had other personal issues which required my attention. So if anybody's wondering about either why I took so long in continuing this or why there's this noticeable hiccup, well, that essentially explains it. But anyway, since I've got a little bit of extra time on this one, I don't want to do this over too many individual video uploads. So let me see if I can squeeze a couple of more in here. Going on to the next point, where she makes the following statement. He states or implies that women who do not want to have sex with men are inhibited, prudes, stuck up, man-haters, or psychologically ill. Oh, so women don't do that to men when men turn them down for sex, right? I mean, all these guys out here who have ever turned down an offer to have sex with a woman, he was never called faggot or queer or lame or weak or accused of having a pencil dick or we probably don't know how to fuck know how and all these other things. No, stuff like that doesn't come out of the mouths of women, does it? You know, when women just handle rejection beautifully and with all the decency and etiquette of, come on, cut the BS. You know you're being more than disingenuous with this. And to try to apply something like this as an indicator of someone who supports the crime of rape, This would be like a black girl inviting a white boy out on a date. And as part of their date, she invites him to accompany her to the hip-hop concert that's coming to town. And he lets it be known that, hey, I don't like hip-hop music, or I don't like the atmosphere of hip-hop concerts, or I don't like the message of hip-hop music, or whatever. And so you're saying that by your logic, that the black girl in this scenario who was faced with this rejection, well, she can call him anything from being closed-minded to, what, you just like white music, you only like rock and roll, you don't like soul music at all, you don't like black people's music at all, or that she would even go so far as to call him a racist and a bigot, and to claim that that attitude was an indication that he supports the crime of lynching, because that's essentially the equivalent that you're offering. You're in essence saying that just because somebody has an emotional outburst because they got rejected and turned down off of their offer, if such an outburst actually takes place, and I'm not going to deny it, sometimes such outbursts do happen. I've just stated what happens usually when men turn down women for sex. So we know such outbursts are real, but to build upon that and claim that, well, if somebody's going to get indignant about being turned down or having an offer denied, that somehow equates into, I wish evil upon you, then you are being hatefully dishonest to the nth degree. And let me see if I can squeeze this one in before I have to cut out of here again. He supports sexual liberation and claims women would have more sex with men or with more men if society did not inhibit them. And with that one statement, you have shown your total ignorance and the fact that you do not know your own history. The sexual revolution was a product of the late 1960s and early 1970s, and it was viewed and promoted as a liberation of women by women. It was women who were the foremost supporters and advocates of the sexual revolution. And men being the horn dogs that we already are anyway, it was only natural that we would be similarly enthusiastic about such prospects of women losing their inhibitions, offering up free love, because now it meant that thanks to this thing called the birth control pill and women shedding off this mantle of prudishness, that we were no longer restricted to seeking sexual fulfillment within the confines of a marital relationship. But of course, this so-called liberation came with its own particular brand of enslavement chains, most notably in the form of the pandemic of sexually transmitted diseases, and later on with a plethora of birth control options available to women, because there are only 2 options for men versus 24 for women. And yet the sexual revolution, even with the advent of a heap of birth control methods, still brought with it the shame of out-of-wedlock births. And so in both instances, that's not men's fault. It's women's fault for deciding that liberation, quote unquote, was more important and more fulfilling than monogamy and commitment were. Anyway, that's enough for this segment. I'll come back and address more later. Talented 10th.